Welcome very much to our first cross-country thematic learning event. And we are so delighted to get started with these. We're going to have a series of about 6, 3 of which will take place in this fiscal year. So gender transformative approaches, empowering and mainstreaming women in land restoration. And we are so delighted to have this event. And I want to just give a sense of why we're doing this. So these events emerged from the joint reflective learning missions that we had, and we saw that there's several constraints and emphasis that people were making. And we thought, okay, let's send out a survey. Let's find out what people would like to discuss with their other country teams, and let's learn from each other. This is a huge opportunity. We're going into the last year of the Regreening Africa program, and it's time for us to share our lessons across the countries. And I'm glad to hear that some people are still joining us. So how is this day going to go? We are going to be inviting our gender expert, Anamaria Paez Valencia, to set the stage and bring us into this topic of gender transformative approaches. Then Hilda Kigodi, who we all know from MEL, is going to be giving us a little more insight into who we are as the countries, because we've all been engaged in these resilience indexes, and one was on equity. She's going to talk a bit more about that. Then we're delighted to have Gloria Adayaga, who is going to give us this Ghana case, which is absolutely fascinating. We had anticipated having a case from Mali, but unfortunately that didn't work out. And I want to apologize to those. I found out that today is a holiday. I only found out last night, and I apologize for that. But our dear colleague Mawa Karambiri is going to give us some insights on women's access to land and rights, which we know is a bigger topic, but we will spend more time on it at another time. And then, as you will all have seen in the invitations, we asked you to think about the constraints that women were facing in implementation, in participation in our projects, and how we've overcome them and what we might add in the future. So we'd like to keep this as much as possible open to dialogue, which means I need to stop speaking, but I want everyone to feel comfortable. Speak to the time you were given, please. And please ask questions in the chat box. Again, note that in the chat box, please send the message to everyone. And I think that we'll be able to have a great session. So I'm going to ask one last question, and I'm going to ask you to go back to the chat box now and just remind us. In our country implementation, we have found that X at blank has been a critical constraint to women's engagement. We'd like you to register those in the chat box, those constraints, so that our speakers can react to those as possible. And as always, we want, so please start registering those. I'm going to look into the chat box and see if they are coming in. I'm not seeing them. What constraints have you met going into project implementation? What constraints? Cultural impediments. Thank you, Peter. To access resources and decision-making at household level. Land management and control. Thank you, Philip. Olaf, access and control to land and natural resources. So please continue to add the constraints that you've run up against. Access to land, continuing to be an issue. So if you continue to add those, and then please, throughout our session today, please do continue to put your questions and your comments in the chat box. And of course, we'll be calling on many of you to make your interventions. So at this point, it's my great delight to introduce Anamaria, and she is going to set the stage for us on gender transformative approaches. Anamaria, thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you, Constance. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay.
Beautiful.
Okay. So you have the full screen now?
We can see the next slide. So I'm wondering, it might be something in the display.
Yeah,
settings.
go to display settings, Anamaria, and then you can change it over there in, okay.
Okay, let me see. I know. I guess I know what the problem was. Okay. Now?
Thank you, Robbie. It's going again. So let's go back to Robbie's explanation. No, you can keep it on, and then he can tell you how to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go back to slideshow.
Now go to display settings. On this, you can see at the top left hand, you can see display settings. Where it says show taskbar, extreme left. Says show taskbar, and above the screen. Go above this.
Okay. Yes, show taskbar. Yes.
No, the next one now. Display
Yes.
settings. Go to display settings. To the right. Right of that is display settings.
It's not there. I have mute next to it.
I can see it on your screen, so it must be there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you could just do duplicate slideshow. There you go.
Does it work now? Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Oh, man. Okay.
Fantastic. Great teamwork. Thank you,
Sorry
Anna
about that.
Maria.
Thanks so
Thank you,
much,
Robbie.
I feel like you've been through this so many times. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anamaria Paez. I work with for ICRAF as a gender specialist, and I'm supposed to give you like a crash course or an introduction of what are gender transformative approaches. It's going to be a bit challenging to do in 10 minutes. So, but we'll see. At least it could help us understand better when we hear the examples we will hear in the next presentations. And so to start, I would like to, I can move to the next slide. Okay. So to start, I want to refer to this framework that was developed by the Food Policy Research Institute, and was then added by the Fish Agri-Food Systems CGR program. And this framework, I think is very useful because it allows us to align the approaches and the activities to the project goals, and to the specific project goals in terms of what do you want to achieve in terms of women's empowerment or in terms of gender equality. So the Rich, Benefit, Empowered, Transform framework recognizes women as a disadvantaged group. And the idea is to help project teams and project designers to consider what is the aim of the project, and then decide, and that will help then define what will be the strategies and the indicators that will achieve the goal. So, and it helps also differentiate between these different levels of engagement. First, we have reach. So is the goal to reach women, and in this case, this is referring mainly to including them in project activities, or is the project to benefit women by improving their circumstances in some way, or is the project looking to empower women? And this then means strengthening their ability to make strategic life choices. And this also involves that there are some choices for women, some real choices for women to make. And finally, transform. And this refers to transforming gender norms and relations. This is within and also outside the household, and includes also changing attitudes at the community level and at the institutional level. So here we have a little bit more detail to understand and to see how this framework can help projects when thinking through how they want to approach gender issues. So as you see, the objective when you are on the first step of the ladder, let's say, on reach, the objective is to deliver agricultural extension services to women. And these are examples. Of course, the objective could vary. It could vary, but in this case, let's say the objective is deliver agricultural extension service to women. And what are the strategies here? The strategies are, for example, provide transportation or reducing the cost for attending the extension servicing, the extension or the capacity building events. Also conducting trainings during convenient times of the day, taking into account women's reproductive roles and the times where they are more likely to attend a training. And the indicators here are very simple. It's just the proportion of women attending a training or receiving extension advice. So when we're looking at this, we're only reaching women. Now, the next step of the ladder is benefiting women. And this goes a bit beyond, you'll see. So here the objective is not only deliver a service, but also increase women's well-being in some way, right? The strategies here are considering women's preferences and constraints in design and content of trainings. So here the training is not only about getting women to the training, but it's also designing a training that is actually responding to a specific needs of women or to a specific constraints that women are facing. The indicators in this case will be then related to that, those constraints that the training is trying to address. So in this case, we see the example is sex disaggregated data for land use, yields or incomes, consumption, nutrition, time use. Now the next level is empowering. And this is much more engaging. You know? Here the objective is increasing women's agency over production and nutrition decisions. Again, these are examples. So increasing women's agency over production, it could be also increasing women agencies over marketing or commercialization. And when we are referring to agency, we refer to their self-confidence. There are various levels of agency. So it could be also could be within the individual levels. So their self-confidence, their capacities, their knowledge, but also at the relational level. So how the women in this case, for example, if using the example I was referring to, if we are talking about accessing markets or commercialization, to which extent are women being allowed to go to markets? To which extent are they allowed to do the sell or to decide how much is sold and the price, for example? The strategies here then are, again, more engaging. So enhancing women's decision-making power in households and communities, enhancing women's voice at household level when it comes to deciding, for example, what is sold and at what times and at what price. And the indicators are about decision-making power. So whether women are having a voice and that voice is having a value in those decisions. And in some cases, even reduction of gender-based violence, reduction of workloads or time burden. So here, this graph basically exemplifies how, when we're talking about empowerment, we need to go much beyond the strategies for reaching women. And we need targeted efforts. And we need first we need to understand what are the constraints and what are the contexts in which women are participating in the project-related activities. And then we need targeted efforts to address those constraints within the scope of the project. Now, Now, going to transformation, I was mentioning at the beginning that the framework goes reaching, benefiting, empower, and then we have transformation. And gender transformative approaches have been brought to the gender discourse and to the gender mainstreaming discourse in development and in academia in the last 10 years or so, trying to as a critique first of the norm or the usual business as usual approach to gender mainstreaming that was more like using gender sensitive approaches or identifying gaps and differences and trying to address those gaps and differences. So very much at the level of benefiting that I was mentioning earlier. But gender transformative approaches then require transforming gender norms and relations. And I thought I would better start explaining what are gender norms and gender relations. And so gender norms are basically a social norm. Gender norms are social norms. And social norms are rules of behavior that are typical, correspond or like, they correspond to a specific society or a specific community. That means that they can change from community to community. So a rule of behavior in a given society that conditions the roles, the activities, the tasks, the responsibilities, even the capacities that are perceived as male or female. So they include also expectations about how a woman or a man should behave in that community, or what is acceptable behavior from men and women. That is a gender norm. And as I was saying, they vary, according to place, according to generation. So the gender norms that are ruling us today are different to those that were 200 years ago or 100 years ago. They vary also according to place. So the gender norms in Kenya are not the same gender norms in Finland. They are also vary according to age. So what is expected from a young woman is very different to what is expected from an older woman. And they are also intersect by class or by ethnic differences. So what is expected from a woman from a lower class is different from the behavior is expected from a woman from a higher class, for example. So it's a very nuanced concept and very context specific. And now gender relations, well, they are the ways in which men and women relate, share, compete for resources, the way they negotiate and bargain about decisions, about power over each other. And they arise from those gender norms. They arise from the roles that men and women are expected to play within their society and within the household. And so gender transformative approaches are basically approaches that aim at changing or addressing those gender norms and relations that are at the base of gender inequalities. That those gender norms and relations that discriminate, that are oppressive, and that generate inequalities and discrimination. But to be able to implement gender transformative approaches, we need to go much beyond the first framework that I was presenting. So and here in the slide you have a few of the critical things that gender transformative approaches entail. So first of all, you need to have a deep understanding of gender dynamics, the gender dynamics and the social inequalities in the context where you're working, and how these inequalities affect livelihoods and affect landscapes decisions, land use, and other variables that the project might be interested in. These approaches also require a critical awareness of gender roles and norms. So engaging with communities and with individuals and across different levels to facilitate these discussions and this critical awareness of deeply ingrained gender norms that are given for granted and people don't really think about them. It requires also challenging some of these norms and some of these behaviors, and that will then reflect on challenging the distribution of resources and allocation of duties within household and communities. Critically, it entails engaging and involving men in the discussions and encouraging collaboration and discourage conflict. So, and that's often something that the women's empowerment, that when practitioners or policymakers come with the discourse of empowerment to many communities face some backlash. Let's say the use of gender transformative approaches can help in addressing some of that by this continuous and intensive engagement with men to create, to frame this as part of as collaboration within the household and not as a zero-sum game of empowerment. And finally, it involves or it requires increasing women's bargaining power. So it requires anyway opening opportunities for women to participate in trainings, to get access to resources, to have access to technologies, information, and those are all part also or a requirement to achieve the rest of the points that I mentioned. The gender transformative approaches require also iterative cycles of critical reflection among all participants. It requires also engagement with different actors across scales, because transforming norms requires, or these gender norms that I was mentioning earlier are embedded in all these different levels in which an individual is placed. So at the household level, at the community level, at the level of organizations that are working around these communities, and also at the level of institution policies and regulations. Also critically, if you want to engage with gender transformative approaches, you need to know that this requires an important time commitment, that ideally you also need to approach this with a strong belief and with passion and a strong belief that positive change in gender relation is possible. And you have to have the right capacities in the team or invest in building those capacities. And we expect also that there will be resistance. There will be resistance to this transformation, and you need to look for ways to address this resistance and to get people on board. Yeah, I think I will leave it there for now, and yeah, and maybe there are some questions. And I think when we hear from Gloria, this will become much more real.
Oh, fantastic. Anamaria, let's give you a huge applause. That was fantastic. That was the best crash course I have ever attended. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Truly, you made so many great points, and it was so clear. And I can see that we are getting some questions, and I think what I'd like to do is invite Peter had a question. Peter Gubbles, would you voice your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a very interesting and clear presentation. There are some new things there for me. We usually talk about empower, although I think that empower is a precursor to gender transformation. The two overlap. But my question is this: I noticed that you spoke of and have written about power over. And I'm just wondering, in our African context, if that is the aim of gender transformation, that we have women. I'm not sure if this is what you're saying, that women have more power over men. The most successful experiences I've seen that lead to genuine or beginnings of transformation is when men realize that they need to share power with women, and that when women have more power and more involvement in decision making, more resources, that it benefits them as well, which leads to the phrasing of power with rather than power over. Can you comment on that, please?
Yes, of course, Nan, you're completely right. I think what was referred with power over was probably referred to power over your own labor, over your own life choices, and over the income of your own livelihoods or activities, income generating activities. But indeed, the idea behind many of the methodologies used as transformative approaches is to, as I also mentioned, is to generate collaboration in the household and collaboration within communities. So that concept of power with is definitely the one that we are considering, and not only collaboration among let's say husband and wife, but also power with can be referred to collective action. So the opportunities that are open and the strength that women, for example, gain when they join a women's group or a cooperative. And how that power with allows also to achieve, to get to the achievements, which is the other dimension of empowerment. Yeah.
Thank you, Anamaria. All right, we're getting a couple more questions, and I think it would be fantastic. I know you're saying that we're going to hear some case studies, and that's going to help elaborate some of the deeper meaning of the framework. But let's just check in on a couple. I just want, and this one may be for everybody. Emmanuel is asking, Emmanuel, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Can you unmute?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot of stereotyping in Africa where women are, like in our country, Kenya, like early in the days, the women were not even allowed to go to school, saying that they are the weaker gender, and this became a stereotyping engraved in our culture. And what's the best way to overcome such norms and other stereotypes of such of sorts?
Yeah. Well, what the example we're going to hear from Ghana is designed to address some of these stereotypes, but I can tell you that this is not easy. So changing norms and changing attitudes and beliefs is definitely not easy. It's time consuming. It's a long-term process, and so it requires a long-term engagement and building trust with the communities and with the people you're working with. One key to it is when you manage to like when we engage communities in facilitated discussions about gender norms and how these gender norms generate inequalities. One thing that always comes up is how some of these gender inequalities are actually obstacles for the household achieving its goals or achieving what they want to do with the resources they have. So that's for example one strategy. If you can work with people around those stereotypes and discuss and facilitate a discussion in which the stereotype becomes or it's made as evident as a challenge or as an obstacle to achieve a goal that the community has or that the household have, that then people start responding more to it and being more open to revise it and to question it.
Thank you for that, Anamaria. And I do know that that we're going to hear more and more about that, but it has come up as a deep constraint for many of the projects as they registered early on. We're going to take one last quick question from Michael, and I know we have 2 other questions in the chat box. Anamaria, if you would just take a look at those, but we can continue to answer those through the program. Michael, please, if you could unmute and ask your question, and then we are going to move on.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the nice presentation. My question is, when you talk about gender transformation, do you only talk about women transformation, or it also entails the transformation of men also? And would you please comment in terms of change of narrative? Like in Africa, we often talk about like the percentage of women participating in forestry activities, or let's say the number of women who are able to access land resources and such things. Can we now talk about the other way around, where we change the narrative and talk about the number of men who allow participation or something of the sort? Can you comment on in terms of narrative change and also in terms of transformation? Thank you.
Okay, I think when you're talking about transformation, as I was referring to, transformation refers to transforming gender norms, and gender norms, as I explained, are relations, are behaviors, respected behaviors for both men and women. And some of these gender norms and these gender stereotypes can be harmful for both men and women. So, for example, the expectation that men are the breadwinners or the main breadwinners can be as harmful for men, as harmful for women as it can be for men as well. So when we're talking about transforming these harmful gender norms, this should benefit also men. This should also open opportunities for men to explore different roles that they haven't done before. For example, explore their role as fathers or as caregivers, which they've been somehow deprived of through this socialization, these strict gender roles and norms. So yeah. In the same way, well, you talk about changing the narrative. I think I will change the narrative to this narrative that I was just explaining before. And then the narrative is not, okay, but what about men? No, the narrative is, well, gender norms are harmful for both men and women. And dismantling them can open opportunities and possibilities for both men and women. In any case, I would definitely recognize that women are in a more vulnerable position than men in most contexts. It may be that in some specific context that is not the case, and it may be also that in some specific context men are perhaps in the same vulnerable position as women are in terms of, for example, lack of access to land, or in terms of poverty levels, for example, and that's perfectly possible the case in many contexts. But we know there is plenty of evidence, historical evidence also, that women are in a vulnerable position. They are in a disadvantaged position in relation to men. Particularly when it comes to participation in income generating activities and participation in politics and in community level discussions and access to communal resources. So that's why that narrative is so prevalent. But I agree with you that perhaps that is not very constructive always. And so I very much like to have to refer to that, to how gender norms can also be harmful for men, and how transforming them and addressing them can open lots of possibilities for the whole community.
Brilliant, thank you. And Michael's already written that was a wonderful response. So well done. Thank you for that. And so Anamaria, we're all friends here. So there are some really good questions in the chat box from Olaf and Sami, and you may just want to type a couple of responses, but we will make sure they get aired as well. So at this point, as Regreening Africa, we really wanted to take a quick look across our countries and sort of see where we stand based on the evidence. As you know, we're always keen to review and interrogate evidence. So I'd like to now invite Hilda, who's going to give us a very brief overview of the studies that have been done, so we can look across countries and reflect on that data. And then we're going to go to Gloria and hear the case study from Ghana. So Hilda, welcome very much. We're so delighted that you were willing to work up the data in a way that we could all look at it together. And so with that, I will give you the floor. Let me know if you have any challenges with the presentation.
Thank you very much, Constance. I'm going to try to share my screen right now. Please let me know if you can see.
I think if you try the slide presentation button one more time, and then we go, yeah, present. Thank you. Let's see how that works.
Okay. Is it okay now?
Yeah, if you can just hit on that got it button, and then we can see your screen. Do you see a little message to yourself about live captions? Thanks. Oh, here we go again. All right, so back up to display settings at the top. Do you see the top bar?
I see it, but I do not say, I do not see the
display settings.
No, I don't see
at
that.
the top. Okay.
It might be obscured by the you get like a little bar of the buttons, the zoom buttons. You just need to move that so that you can see.
Yeah, I moved that.
Can you see at the very top of display settings?
Yes.
Great.
That's exactly what happened to me.
Yeah, exactly. I think it might happen to all of us. All right. So, and then what is it, Robbie? Is it duplicate? Which one?
It's
there we go.
Duplicate,
Perfect.
Duplicate. There you go.
Well done. All right. Thank you, Hilda.
All right.
You're on.
Thank you. So my name is Hilda Kegode, and I work with ICRAF in the male unit. This is the impact assessment unit. And in the project, we are looking mainly at evidence and trying to see and trying to guide partners and other units within the project at ICRAF to bring together the evidence to be able to show what the program is doing. And so at the beginning of the project in 2018, we carried out some baseline studies across all countries where we are implementing the Regreening Africa program. And these are the countries where we did our surveys. And right from the start, we tried to look at the gender aspects by ensuring that we are interviewing both men and women so that we could obtain sex disaggregated data, which would enable us to, look at various indicators, various variables, and make, relationships, to be able to see relationships between our data across the country. So right from the start, we had both men and women interviewed, and we tried to get a balance across the board. So we didn't have a very small number of men, for example, in one country, and a very large number of women, but we tried to balance the numbers. So from the regreening, from the ICRAF male unit, we came up with this regreening action index, which we have shown quite a number of times. And the whole idea with this index was to come up with a composite index, which would enable us to measure how the regreening activities across the countries had progressed from the time we start the project to the time we end the project, to be able to see whether we have actually made a change and not just, to be able to see whether we've made a change and that change is evidenced by our data. So this index that we have had 4 dimensions. And the reason we have the intra-household equity dimension is that we are looking at regreening as a wholesome concept. It's not just about you having additional trees on farm or you diversifying the tree species on farm, but we're also looking at how both men and women have been brought together in the project to be able to restore land, to be able to adopt agroforestry, to be able to carry out practices that would be beneficial for the household and for the landscape. So in the dimension on intra-household equity, we were looking at things like, are women involved in decision-making when it comes to agroforestry? And we're also looking at whether both men and women are involved in activities that relate to agroforestry. That's what we are calling agroforestry activity with shared gender division of labor. We are also asking whether, in terms of oversight or management of trees on farm, are both men and women involved? And then the last indicator that we have in the dimension was looking at sales and sales from agroforestry products and whether women are involved in spending decisions, so that we can see are women only engaged in the work and not benefiting from selling the products or from income coming from products, and also for men, what are their roles in agroforestry at household level? So today, because we are looking at gender, I will not focus on the other dimensions, but I will only look at the dimension, the indicators that fall in the purple dimension. So at baseline, this is what we had. So I'd like to draw your attention to the purple bars, which are at the bottom of the chart. So for each country, you would see the distribution of the index according to whether the dimension is extent of practice, which is something totally different, the intensity. So looking at the intra-household equity, which now talks about the gender component, across you can see that the height of the bars vary, and the higher it is, the better it is for that dimension. So at baseline level, we could see that in Rwanda, they had a higher level of women engagement in agroforestry as measured by these 4 indicators. The lowest at that point was Niger and Senegal. But then, as I'm going to show you, with the uptake surveys which we have been doing, which ICRAF adopted to enable us check progress of the program, we can see that there are some differences in some countries, some not very big, but at least we have seen that there are differences that can be attributed to some interventions that the program has undertaken. So we had envisaged doing at least 2 uptake surveys in each country, but we were not able to do that because of various challenges. So in total, since the program began, we have done a total of 11 uptake surveys. In year 2, which was 2019, which was the year ending in mid-2019, we had 3 uptake surveys, Ghana, Mali, and Niger. And in that uptake survey, we had reduced the number of indicators that were used to measure the gender dimension to only 2. So we were only looking at agroforestry established with female decision-making within the past 1 year, which was 12 months before we did the uptake survey. And the second indicator we were looking at in this uptake is agroforestry activity with shared division of labor. That is to just see whether both men and women are involved in activities that are related to agroforestry. From that uptake survey, we saw very, very low scores for the individual indicators, these 2 indicators across the three countries. So Ghana had 0.025, Mali had 0.01, Niger also had 0.01 in just those 2 indicators. And so our recommendations at that time were to engage with the country teams and maybe point out the need to identify barriers to women's involvement in regreening activities. And then we also encourage them to develop gender responsive scaling approaches so that at least they could have that indicator improve the next time we did an uptake survey. And then one task that was supposed to have been undertaken was by ICRAF actually, was to guide the partners on integrating gender in the land restoration activities like FMNR, in tree planting, and anything else, grafting, anything else that was being done in whatever country it was. So those were the recommendations that came out of the year 2 uptake surveys. Now in year 3, we were able to do 4 uptake surveys in Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda, and Senegal. And in year 4, we were able to do 4 other surveys, Ghana, Mali, Niger, and Senegal. But in year 4, 2 of these surveys were making reference to year 3. So the results that I will show under year 4 would be for the year 4 year of implementation for Ghana and Senegal, but for year 3 year of implementation for Mali and Niger. So let me just move on to the year 3 uptake surveys that we did. So these are the 4 countries that we did uptake surveys in year 3. And generally, we can see an increase in the regreening index in total. There was an increase for all the countries. But then when we zoom in to the intra-household equity as measured by the 2 indicators, agroforestry with females involved in decision-making and agroforestry work, which involves both men and women. That means shared labor. We see that in Rwanda, this dimension was high compared to the other countries, but also compared to maybe within the country to the diversity of practice indicators. So in Rwanda, this dimension was performing better. In Senegal, it was very low. And so we recommended that we needed to emphasize gender aspects in the regreening work and decision-making, because those are the 2 indicators that then were showing us why it is low. In Ethiopia, we also made the recommendation because, as you can see here in Ethiopia, the dark purple bar is slightly bigger. That is the one that talks about female involvement in decision-making, which wasn't too bad. But then in joint involvement of both men and women in labor for restoration activities, we see that it was a bit low. So we need to look at that. So we recommended to the Ethiopia team that this had to be emphasized. And in Kenya, that was the same thing. Just looking at what factors would be limiting women involvement in agroforestry activities. And broadly, the whole idea is to be able to adapt and identify and then adapt according to the context. So I think Anamaria said that these gender transformative approaches need to be in the context in which you're operating. And therefore, what you take in Rwanda will not be the same as what you use in Senegal or Kenya. Now, moving on to year 4, and here is where we have Mali and Niger, still referencing the 3rd year of implementation. We found that here in Niger, again, it was the lowest scoring dimension when you compare to the other dimensions of the index. And then we also did not see a very big difference between the baseline and the time we carried out this survey. So that means that maybe we have stalled on this indicator. We are not doing as much as it is required to be able to move it. In Mali, there was some improvement in the female inclusion in decision making, but the index was still low overall. So that means, again, more work is required to be able to increase women's participation, joint decision making, and shared division of labor. Senegal, again, this dimension was scoring the least amongst all the dimensions of the regreening index. And what we found is that in all clusters that where the implementation is happening, all the village clusters were below the threshold that we had set for showing good performance. Now, Ghana is one case study that Anamaria has mentioned, and I believe Gloria is going to be showing us, but there was a significant shift in women's involvement in agroforestry decision-making. You can see the dark purple bar here is really thick, and also we could see an improvement in shared division of labor. However, as I will be showing in the next slide, for Ghana, which is specifically looking at Ghana, you can see that the biggest jump is in Mion, in this district. In Mion, this is the baseline in 2018, and this is the uptake survey that we carried out this year. So you can see a big jump, especially in the decision-making indicator, and I think Gloria is going to be expounding on that and telling us why we probably are seeing that. So gender, female involvement in decision-making is something that I think the Ghana team has really focused on, comparing all the 3 districts at baseline, and during the uptake, you can see a big difference. I had also brought this follow-up survey for Mali compared to the baseline, because I thought Mali was going to present. But the intra-household equity dimension, as I had mentioned, is still low relative to other dimensions. Although we have seen some improvement in decision-making, you can see from the baseline, the dark purple bar was barely visible from the graphs on the left. But then from the graphs on the right, you begin to see dark purple appearing, which was a good indication that at least some work has been done towards improving women's involvement in decision-making as far as agroforestry decisions is concerned. So just finally, at baseline, we saw that in all the countries except for Rwanda, the gender dimension was the lowest. In the scoring of the index that we are using to measure progress of the program, we saw that gender dimension was lowest in all the countries except Rwanda. But with the uptake surveys, for example, what we have just seen in Mali, some slight improvement, in Senegal, some slight improvement in Kenya, in Ethiopia as far as decision making is concerned, but a very big jump in Ghana. So overall, the dimension was still low when you put everything together. And that means that we still have to do a lot more work in this last year of the program to just see whether we can improve the indicator, but not just to improve the indicators, but really to be able to equip women and men together as we exit, to be able to continue the practice of agroforestry while having the gender, perspectives in mind. And lastly, of course, as we are also focusing on gender at country level, we should not lose sight of the targets that we had at the beginning. So we still have to focus on the number of households and the number of hectares under a greening practice that the donor would be expecting us to report on. Thank you. Thank you, Constance.
Thank you so much, Hilda. That was brilliant. You gave us a lot of detail, but I think it was really important for us to just step back and look, because we've just discussed how different our contexts are. We've also put out there the different constraints that the different countries are facing. And so I think it was really valuable to take a look at that. And thank you for honing in on Ghana, because I think that is, I think that really does tee us up for the next presentation. So Hilda, and I also appreciate it. I could tell that last line was Mel all the way. Let's keep meeting those targets. So thank you. All right, and if you don't mind to stop sharing your screen. And I do want to just comment that Peter says these are impressive results in a short time. Gender change is slow and not easy to sustain. So thank you so much for that. And you're getting a lot of thanks and applause in the chat box, and I see other people applauding. So thank you. I think what I'd like to do now is if we could just go directly into the presentation from Ghana. It was really nice to see the data, and now to say, okay, maybe here are some of the ways that change happens. So big kudos from, I hope you're checking the chat box. Thank you there, Hilda. All right, so Gloria is going to walk us through a really exciting case. And Gloria, you have the floor. We would, and let me know if you have any problems. Oh, great to see you. Let me know if you have any problems with the presentation. Brilliant.
And I need to do what Anna and Hilda did, right?
Yours is good. It looks, well, let's just see. Hit the presentation button at the bottom. There we go. You're right on. It's perfect.
Okay. Okay, so let me go to the beginning. Sorry about that.
I'm hearing a little bit of background noise. I just want to make sure everyone is muted. Okay, maybe it, okay. Thank you so much, Gloria.
Sorry, I'm sharing the office with others, so I'm just indicating to them that I am about to start my presentation. So it's afternoon here in Ghana, so good afternoon to everyone. I'm Gloria. I am still in the process of carrying out the gender research on the regreening project. I also support CRS and World Vision with their technical activities on the regreening project. So I would like to start by saying that I put a few reflections for everyone to look at, and then hopefully at the end of my presentation or during the discussions, we could also share some feedback on this. So my first reflection then is, how can projects reflect gender in their project design? Sorry, I'm trying to move. And implementation beyond equal male and female participation interventions. And as part of that, what needs to change institutionally for this change to happen? And also looking at how we can overcome contextual barriers to achieve the gender goals we set for ourselves in projects. So ideally, I've been thinking that, for my research, ideally, gender equity in land restoration would look like something like this, where women are able to decide the location and intensity of project implementation, where women are also deciding whether or not they want to implement technologies or practices that have been taught to them, where there should also be a gender balance in leadership, and men and women benefit equally from land uses that have been restored, whilst also women and the youth are involved in all the links of the value chain and profiting from those. So why do we need to carefully consider gender in land restoration? Anamaria has spoken to that, and I'm just reiterating that in the Ghanaian context by saying that it's because we have constraints, gender-based constraints that have been tightly woven into the fabrics of our lifestyle. And in the Northern Ghana context, that starts from how land is inherited, which is handed down along the male lineage. That automatically seeds land decisions to men, and land being the huge production factor that it is, that then also seeds other dimensions of household decisions to men. There are also other cultural norms that then restrict access to certain land uses or trees. And we know from research or from our work experience that women's incomes are directly tied to tree resources. So these constraints then impact women's access and control to these resources. And women have also been documented to play a significant role in forest management. So it means that if you are not involving women in decision making, it means we are not reflecting their perspectives in land restoration designs. This is a result I'm sharing from the West African Forest and Wildlife Interface project that was carried out on the same landscape. And it's just to buttress the point I made earlier that women's incomes are tied to the land and tree resources. You see that for the 4 major income sources that were captured, women had the highest sources of income from off-farm activities that were largely from selling tree products, baobab, shell nuts, or the butter made from these nuts, and also from directly trading in trees as firewood or also for charcoal. The same project also revealed that women and men have different perspectives of perceptions of the value of tree-based ecosystems in the different land uses. The graph to my left is the women's perspective of perceptions of the value of ecosystems in the different land uses compared to the men. You see that there are clear areas of overlap, but then there are also very distinct differences between what the men perceive to be valuable, land uses men perceive to be valuable compared to what women perceive to be valuable. This is another reason to capture both perspectives in land restoration design and implementation. So the goal of this research then is to determine whether if restoration interventions adopt a deliberate gender transformative approach, we would obtain desired outcomes from land restoration. So as part of that, the objective was to establish the baseline of assets, of norms and customs of land and tree access, sources of income and control, rules and decision pathways in the household, and then describe the forces at the household level that affected land restoration outcomes. And then at the end, we would analyze the pathways to gender transformation in household due to the gender transformative actions which are then the treatments that we impose. So the research is carried out in 3 phases. The first phase is the baseline, which we carried to establish the status quo, what is currently prevailing. And then we carried out the treatment in half of those communities, which is 15 of the 30 research communities. And then at the end, we would have an end line, which is scheduled for December this year, and then have a comparative analysis of the indicators we seek to measure in terms of access, inputs into decision, and control of resources, work burdens. Yeah. The first result we got out of the baseline was to show how land restoration was currently being implemented. We identified 6 main land uses, being the homesteads, the grazing areas, bush farm, rice fields, dry season gardens, and then the forest reserves. And we have categorized these into low decision areas and complex decision areas. When I say low decision areas, it means that the levels to take a decision on the land are not are very simple. They are not the hierarchy is very low compared to the other land uses. And the results show that land restoration is occurring mainly in the homesteads and the grazing areas. And if you look at the bar, which is also showing the access and control to these land uses, you would observe that land restoration activities are then happening in land uses where women have limited access and control. So if you are increasing the vegetation, improving the soil in these land uses, the probability that women would benefit from this, it's actually low compared to the land uses where women have greater access and greater control. And the implications of this is that the continuous degradation of the resource base continues here. And that has future implications for the livelihoods of women and household sustainability. And this summarizes the results from the baseline, and I categorized them as access, and we saw that women have greater access to agricultural land compared to women. Women only had control over 1 land use, whilst men, compared to men who had control over 5 land uses. And 100% of the women were dedicating time to household chores compared to only 12% of men. And Anamaria spoke earlier about unequal work burdens. So this is clearly shows that in the households we worked on, there was an imbalance of work burdens. And we also measured, tried to capture the attitudes, gender attitudes, and 71% of the male respondents revealed that they did not feel the need to discuss land restoration with women, even though 59% of men agreed that women were better at nurturing trees. And only 2% of the female respondents we interviewed had some inputs on the types of trees to plant on the farmlands, compared to 47 men who had a large input in decisions of types of trees to plant on the land. So this was the baseline we established. So in trying to influence this, then we then implemented our gender transformative approach. And I don't want to get into the details of this because Anna has already explained that it's to engage people by challenging their underlying causes of gender inequality, so that women and men can have equity in decisions and control of resources, the labor, and their body and destinies. So the aim of the approach, gender transformative approach that we designed, was to address the unequal access and control to resources, then also the work burdens, participation in decision making, and generally the perception of the woman's role and contributions. The GTA was designed in 3 models that focused on gender stereotypes, also had them discussing shared goals and family visions, and then discussing how to balance decisions, access, labor, and expenditure to sort of keep their families balanced and able to then reach their shared goals and visions. And as part of the gender transformative approach, we cultivated community champions that continue to support the households even after the models, and periodically we go back to monitor, especially the indicators that were the output of the models, the GTA approach. And the gender indicators were a collection of things that men and women wanted to monitor. So for them, these were the things that were important to measure the changes and things that were important for them to measure over the period. And they were classified into 3 categories, from things that were easily achievable after the project to things that required deeper engagement and action and investment over a period. And if you take a look at the indicators, you see that even the indicators for men benefited the women. And I tried to prove that, and I understood that that was an acknowledgement on the men's part that an acknowledgement of the men's privileged position in the community. So their indicators were also benefiting women in order to bring them to sort of an equal level to men. And I've, through the process, been asking myself, how does these gender indicators or GT approach then relate to land restoration outcomes? And I have this diagram to illustrate that. The indicators are sort of like a precursor for empowerment, which then can transform and then help us to help land restoration interventions achieve those desired outcomes. We see that the continuous engagement, continuous active engagement and investments results in a shift in gender relations at the household level, especially, which is the unit we are working at, where men and women negotiate and bargain. And then as a result of that, we see that the household well-being is improved from improved relations where men and women and children can freely discuss their challenges and realign their goals and have a common vision towards which they move things around, resources around to achieve. And the result of this improved household well-being would then be that households are more resilient. Household and the communities at large are more resilient from having a shared assets, access, decision, work burdens, and leadership. And hopefully women and the youth become fairly engaged in land restoration interventions across the landscape. And then we can then begin to see the outcomes, the desired outcomes in terms of species choice, the sites being prioritized to be restored, soil health improvement, and a reduction in bush burn. The early results we have from the GTA is that from these exercises we have carried out, 80% of the women in the 15 communities have access about half an acre to plant groundnuts, bambara beans, and wheat. So these are traditionally women's crop. And I would say here that the access they get is to homesteads, which are the prized land uses and usually controlled. And before these exercises were prioritized for men's cultivation. We have also seen that more than half of the male participants are involved in some household chores, fetching water from long distances and washing clothes, and also involved in childcare. And 95% of the male participants also reported that women have started taking care of their livestock, which has greatly reduced deaths, thefts, because when men peter the livestock and out of the communities in the past, the women were not interested to water the livestock or even bring them back to their homesteads. 70% of the women participants feel included in household decisions, but to see their inputs being reflected in the final decisions need further engagements and action. And there's a huge interest from non-participating households and communities that I'd say at this point that the potential to scale these GTAs are quite high in the landscape. And for the purposes of sharing the lessons I've learned, I have these 8 points that from my experience, I think that land restoration interventions prioritizing gender must be deliberate or intentional about the gender components when they plan, when they design, and especially when they budget. I saw a comment in the chat box about gender being a huge investment, and I'd also share from my research that yes, that's true. So as part of the planning, there needs to be a budgeting component that goes with it so that we could go beyond reaching and benefiting to then actually empowering and transforming gender in our landscapes. And then capacities need to be developed and strengthened to be able to deploy these gender interventions. And there's also the need for an understanding that gender is context specific. That needs a lot of adaptation, which is what I did. And there's not a one size fits all, which could also be a problem. It means that when the context changes, you need to make these adaptations. That comes with cost too. And the change, I put that in inverted comments, or whatever needs to happen needs to be group driven. It needs to be an internal agenda. You cannot impose that from sitting in our various offices. And I would commend World Vision because I worked on their sites, because there were some existing precursors. They have such a good relation on the ground that it was easy to go in and have these discussions. People were more open to having these discussions. And there were also pre-existing conditions, like the younger folks were also more open to having these discussions because of education. And there's also a lot happening on social media. People are sharing skits of men and women having these interchange roles. And there's lots also happening in terms of sensitization and capacity development in all the other related interventions that are happening across the landscape. And people have also been exposed to different ways of living from their seasonal migration. That is very predominant on the landscape. There should also be an understanding that gender transformation action requires continuous engagement and action. You cannot just end when the project ends. So it should be sort of self-driven so that it can be more sustainable. And as part of that, we need to cultivate some local champions that keep the process going. And I'd say the indicators have also been quite influential because people celebrate the success and the opportunities to discuss their challenges and difficult topics have also been quite eye-opening and rewarding for the participants that we engage. And they come to these discussions, and I'd say they recalibrate and then they go back and continue the discussions. So this is my experience from the regreening landscapes of Ghana. I'm happy to take your questions or your feedback. Thank you.
Okay, that first fantastic was muted. Fantastic. That was just really, really good. Gloria, thank you so much. And I feel like if we could just get everyone to give an applaud for Gloria. There was a lot of work represented in that brief presentation. And one of the things that I was just so impressed by was the actual engagement structure. What those different levels of bringing people in to get much more comfortable talking about some of those deep expectations that they would like to have from men and women. So thank you again for that. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to open the floor. And now let's just have some questions and answers for around any of the topics that we've heard about. I would love to, there are a few questions already in the chat box, but I would love it if we could, I don't know, if you could bring on your video when you want to speak. It would be wonderful to see people. Do we have any burning questions for Gloria? I would be surprised if not. Well, in that case, I'm going to ask you to keep raising questions, but I saw that we've got a couple of questions in the chat. And first I'm going to have Peter take the floor, and then I'm going to come back to some of the others. Peter?
Yeah, Gloria, I was expecting something in your presentation. I should tell everyone that I was part of the trip that Miki was on as well, to see the work in Ghana, and that was just a few days ago. What I found most impressive was the role playing, where you asked men to act as women and dress up and act as women, and women to dress up and act as men. And they did a theater, a rural theater, which I thought was really probably crucial to changing attitudes. And I'm just wondering if you could briefly explain that, because I think that's something that's worth sharing with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Gloria, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Peter, for that. So that was part of the first model as part of talking or discussing these gender stereotypes. We had these role plays with the men playing women, as Peter mentioned, and women playing the reverse. And that was deeply revealing, especially for the men. And I always give the instance of the very young bride who was playing the role of a man. She came to the role play, her baby was sitting on her, but this time she was playing the role of a man. And the wives, which is in this case was being played by the men, were asking permission for something. I don't remember what it was now. They were asking her permission to undertake something, and she was very adamant in her response. She refused to give them the permission. So after the role plays, we were having a discussion about why did she refuse the men, and her response was she didn't really have a reason, but she just didn't feel like giving them the permission. And to which she said that was how the men usually treated them. So she wanted to give them a taste of their own medicines. And also after this role plays, we found out that the women were happy to stay in the character in the men's clothing, whilst the men quickly removed their women's clothing, because to them they explained that it was a bit humiliating for them. They didn't want to stay in character as women. So that was a scenario that communicated very well the gender stereotyping and how, I would say, I'll use the word with caution, how disadvantaged women were treated with regards to these norms.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. All right, what I think would be interesting, and I really do want to hear from the other countries as well. And Davis has left a question, which is, what strategy can we use to get the best of these gender approaches in the short time left on the project? And I think that one warrants answers from anyone who wants to take that up. But perhaps Gloria, Anamaria, Hilda, if you have any response to that. But I'd love to hear from other countries as well as how you think these approaches could be used in the coming year. Gloria, you want to try?
I said in the short time, that's the thing. I don't know if we can carry out a quick gender intervention, whether there's a quick one or there's a fast one. I don't really know, depends on the context. But I think just being intentional about it, like I said, and as part of your implementation, being aware that gender does not happen from the equal engagement of men and women, but that there are several precursors and underlying constraints that need to be considered. You could take one aspect of it and snowball into something. Maybe Anamaria has deeper insights.
I think she does. Thank you for that, Gloria. Anamaria, please.
Yeah, I think, and I mentioned this earlier in one of my responses. I mean, not every project needs to be set up to address gender transformation. And I think what is important is that we are realistic with what we want to achieve and to understand what it means, gender transformation, right? So it's not like just to put something on paper without really going through what it takes to do the work. So, and again, not every project needs to set up or to aim to transform gender norms and relations. And I think, I mean, every contribution is useful. Every contribution is valid. Even just reaching women is useful. Even just reaching women, engaging them in project activities is a positive thing. What is more important is to have, I think, is to look at it from the perspective of the principles of gender transformation, right? And those are the ones that I was presenting, like that I had in that last slide that I presented, and it's like to try to set up the stage, because this is also a long-term process, as Gloria was saying. So you, when you start engaging in a community, on a site, on a region, in a country, usually you've been working on that region or on this site for some time, or you envision to keep working in that region for a while. So ideally, with every project you start, you can try to build on what has been achieved in previous projects. And one, for example, you can start just understanding the context, understanding what are the gender norms, what are the constraints for women and men to participate in certain activities, to access certain resources, yeah, understanding that. And then the next step will be then, okay, so how can we address those barriers? And maybe at the beginning, with a certain project, you can only address one barrier. Then ideally, with another intervention on the following year, you can address another barrier, right? And whenever, and if you have, maybe if you found some additional funding, then you can build on what you are doing and try to implement some more deeper engagements. That's exactly the case of the work that Gloria is doing. When the Green in Africa project started in Ghana, it was not set up for transformation. And these activities were added later. And they actually added or built upon a previous project that was working in the region that had already engaged with communities and with households there, that had already that understanding of the constraints of the gender norms and relations, and had already started a conversation with those communities, and that critical awareness that facilitated discussion of gender norms had already started on that previous project. So we saw the opportunity to build upon that in the context of the Regreening Africa project in the same region. Now we had additional, we were able to secure additional funding for it, and we added it to the intervention. So yeah, it's basically, I guess it's just looking at it as a long-term process, as a long-term engagement, but possibly the most important is to actually have the will to do it, right? To have that as a long-term goal for the organization, for your organization, or for your team.
Fantastic. Thank you for that response. I think that is extremely helpful. So let me just check in. I want to see some of the other countries. What are your thoughts about what we've heard or what you're already doing to move to an empowerment and towards transformation of women in your country context? The floor is open. And please make interventions in French. We do have interpretation. We don't want that to be an obstacle.
Hi, Constance. This is Mawa.
Hi, Mawa.
Yeah, so I just want to share two quick experience that we observed during our last 2 weeks visit on the field. So I'll do it in French since you're asking for somebody to speak in French. Premièrement, au Sénégal, nous avons
First
observé.
and foremost, in Senegal, we have observed an experience wherein women had some level of privileged access to gardens or farmlands. What is generally termed the vegetable farms that are just nearby their back house. And since these land spaces are not too much under competition with the men, there was therefore the possibility to really work through the project. With the support of Greening Africa, they have been able to integrate the agroforest system, that is to have the trees planted and then also do the cultivation. You know, we even had cabbage farms and so on integrated. All forms of vegetables were integrated. That indeed enabled us to adopt a very dense system wherein in these vegetable farms, we had very useful trees that were also providing healthy coverage and healthy shades. And also that provided us wood that could also be sold to the market. The second experience, still in Senegal, we observed that in Mali as well. That is the trend or tendency of women to have more access to the collective lands. For instance, in a given village, women are able to negotiate by dint of the support of the Green Africa, obtain lands where they can do carry out activities and so on. And what the next question was, what would become of these lands that have been given to the women at the end of the cycle of the project? There was also a support that was provided to the women, a certain group of women, to obtain formalized land rights. Formalized land rights, that is the entities that were in charge of titling lands or issuing titles and so on, in order for land rights for women to be safeguarded. That is also one of the success stories. And that gives a certain form of guarantee in terms of land ownership over a span of time by dint of the Greening Africa project. It's therefore necessary that we do as much as possible documentation of such experiences for the sake of institutional memory, and also see how this can be replicated in other countries. That is all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I really appreciate your bringing in that element of privilege and access. I did want to ask Yami if you would make your comment verbally, please. Yami, you have the floor. Yami? Thank you.
Oui. Bonjour à tout le monde. Oui, je suis là.
Bonjour. Good afternoon to everyone, and my congratulations to my sister Mawa Karambiri for having spoken about the very plausible experience by dint of Greening Africa's project. Indeed, these are agroforestry vegetable farms, which indeed has been the fruit of a very healthy bargain or negotiation, even though not a formal one. And the project has also tried to introduce this integration, which seeks to involve women in this greening campaign, as well as the empowerment of women. Moringa farms and various other vegetables that also contribute to improving the livelihoods of the peasant farmers. This has been a small experience, but I can assure you it is worthy of emulation and can be replicated in other territories, because it is indeed sustainable and to the benefit of the peasant farmers and the peasant women. Thank you. This is the bit I wanted to add.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that intervention, Yami. And Emmanuel, I'm going to come to you. I noticed that you had made a couple of comments in the chat box, so please, your questions we would like to hear.
Okay, thank you, Constance. Okay, on the approaches that were presented, I was hoping maybe to get to know if there are any achievements in line to the SDGs, especially SDG number 5, since we're talking about gender equality as far as landscape restoration is concerned. Okay, another thing from in our country, any committee or any group must consist of a third of the committee members should be women. So I was hoping to know if in these other countries they have other policies or laws that protect the women as far as their participation or their voice being heard in these restoration projects. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right. Yes, I can imagine that different countries have different approaches in terms of quotas, if you will. So thank you for that question, Emmanuel. And as we try to achieve SDG 5, you're absolutely right. There are many things that we could be reporting on. Does anyone have a reaction to Emmanuel's question? In your countries, are there quotas? Are there policies around engagement? And we know there are multiple scales of engagement. Anyone? Gloria, please.
Okay, so I'd say first of all that for engagements in such interventions, what is currently prevailing is an equal engagement for both men and women. But what we are discussing, or what we see to be what needs to actually happen, is that there are underlying factors that influence the women's participation. You could engage equal numbers of men and women in activities, but because there are underlying conditions, women are not actually able to then input those decisions. For instance, in the cultures of Northern Ghana, usually the women do not speak in the presence of men. So you'd find out that you could be engaging with equal numbers of women, but they are just only there to add up to the numbers, but are not actually speaking their minds. And that's what we are talking about, to truly empower them to input these decisions and for their decisions to be reflected.
Thank you for that, Gloria. Thank you for that. Any other responses from other countries about are there national or local policies around engaging women? I'm looking for responses. I'm not seeing any. Yes, please testify. Love to hear from you.
Thank you for
Israt, we hear you. Please go ahead.
I suspect my internet connection because it was weak. But if you can hear me.
Yes.
In Ethiopia, there are many policies which support women's engagement. And we are binding in two categories for projects that are working with non-governmental organizations and governmental organizations as well. So for us, it's important to focus on NGOs policy. For any NGOs which are working in Ethiopia, gender transformation or gender equality is a cross-cutting issue, and it has to include women's empowerment in every activities. I'm not prepared well to say something, but I want to say shortly that in Ethiopia, there are policies which support the empowerment, engagement, and involvement of women. And I can show you with in numerical or in graphics in the next session if I have a chance to show. Thank you.
Superb. Thank you for that intervention, Bisrat. That's extremely valuable to know. And so what I'd like to do now is, because at the beginning, when you registered your constraints, this access and or rights to land by women is a strong constraint. And so we've invited Mawa to give us a short intervention about her experience with this, and also to tee up, hopefully, a very dedicated one of these learning events for the early next year. Mawa, please. Thank you so much. You have the floor.
Thank you, Constance, for giving me back the floor. I feel you have asked me again to speak in French, and so that's what I'm going to do. Je voudrais juste partager.
I would like to first and foremost share some reflections that we have had since the sharing process started this morning, especially on issues pertaining to gender, on issues pertaining to the transformative approach in favor of the gender equity and integration, issues pertaining to peace and land access, ownership by women. These are very sensitive questions, which are also multi-dimensional. What I would like to state is that issues pertaining to gender indeed are issues that have to hinder or hinge much more on power relations. And this power relations factor mostly factors that are affected by how society is molded by the patriarchal system that dominates all over. The social structure, political structure, cultural, socio-cultural dimensions, as well as even the religious factor. And all these shape the social standards. And these social standards, generally speaking, are weaponized by men, weaponized by society to justify the unfair exclusion or unfair marginalization of women, which is an unfair status quo. And this status quo, of course, favors the patriarchal systems of most communities all over on the continent. And generally speaking, that is a status quo that is not working for the women. So therefore, these power relations that are wholly, mostly inequitable and unequal go a long way to disfavor women, marginalize women. And also it has its ripple effect on the level of productivity that women seek to achieve, especially when we talk about land access and land use, which is totally or woefully unequal. However, we know that in most countries, there is no apparent discrimination in the legislative instrument. You will not at the surface notice any discrimination against the women at the surface. However, it is in the practice where we look at the patriarchal systems that dominate that you can really feel the pinch of the patriarchal marginalization in disfavor, total disfavor of women. And that goes a long way to promote what the powers that be also seek to achieve. That goes a long way to rather favor capitalism and all its negativities in total disfavor of the marginalized groups who are mostly women, peasant folk. And this also fleshes out the weaknesses that society have created on women. Women who are in the position of weakness also are not in any position of being supported. They are left to their own devices, and they have conditioned their minds to never expect that any support or any help will be coming from anywhere. So they are left to their devices, and have to struggle to be able to rise up. I hope that next year, if everything goes on well, we should organize a workshop on webinar that would focus on women's access to lands, youth access to lands, and the issues of equity and the gender integration dimension. And we will therefore call on every country and each and every one to share with us your experience vis-a-vis success stories that you may wish to share with us, in order for us to see together what are those dynamics, what are the strategies that were mapped out by that model, in order for us to be inspired and be able to replicate those strategies in order to be able to delve deeper and deal better with the constraints that have been created by the unfair marginalization of the peasant women folk in most of our countries of Africa. We have seen that the Ghanaian experience has a very wonderful dynamics, and that dynamic goes to promote a greater involvement of women at all levels and in all spheres. And that is really worthy of emulation. That is what I wanted to share with you, Madam Constance. Thank you.
Superb. Thank you so much, Mawa. And I do think absolutely we have to get a focus on this going forward. And so we will plan one of these learning events for early next year on that topic and learn from others within our countries, but also experts outside of our countries. So right now I have registered a question in the chat box. If you are willing to share an insight that you gained during our event today, or something that you may do in the future because of the event, please take one moment to just put those ideas into the chat box. What was an insight you gained what might be useful for your work going forward. Please, I'm inviting everyone to register a thought as we start to finish up. So please, I'm not seeing any, and I'm going to invite people to do this. Who's going to be the first to set the stage? Alex, I'm sure you have something you want to put in that chat box. So please register an insight you gained, something you may want to do in the future. And while you're doing that, I just want to remind everyone that the upcoming, thank you, Mama, kicking us off. So appreciate that. I want to remind people that we have 2 more events coming up for the remainder of this calendar year. So on November 2nd, we've got a fantastic program, and a shout out to Sammy, Grace, Jalal, and others who have helped us put together a really nice program on developing and expanding upon agroforestry value chains as an incentive for land restoration. And we've got private sector groups coming in. We've got private sector and project implementers coming in to talk about how they've been able to do that. And then just 2 days later, we're excited to have a program on empowering and mainstreaming youth in land restoration. And so those are some of the key topics that came out of the JRLMs that we want to learn about. So I have got 2 other quick announcements, and then I'm going to invite Mika to make some closing remarks. First of all, I want to ask everyone to make a huge applause for what we've had today. To our speakers who prepared so beautifully for us, and to the interveners. It's just so amazing. So big shout out to Anamaria, to Mawa, to Hilda, to Gloria. I mean, really, they have helped us so much, and we thank you so much for doing that. And so let's please join me in that applause. So, and I see that's what's happening below. Let me just also, can I invite Edna to share her screen? If you, I mean, not share her screen, but to show your video. Edna, are you with us? Edna, thank you. Edna, I apologize for putting you on the spot, but I want everyone to know Edna. Edna is going to be co-facilitating these events, if not leading them. And I just wanted to take this opportunity. Edna has been behind the scenes helping put these programs together, and she will be taking up more of a voice in the coming events. So thank you, Edna. We really appreciate you.
Thank you, Constance.
And with that, and I appreciate seeing some of the learnings in the chat box. And Mika, you've just come from the field. Would you please close us out today?
Thanks so much, Constance. And I just wanted to repeat the thank yous. Thank you to Anamaria for starting us off, to Gloria, to Hilda, to Mawa, and to Constance and Edna for supporting the facilitation. It's been a really wonderful session of the first of many cross learnings. And thank you to everyone that also joined. So we had quite a good level of participation, and a number of people also said they wanted to be here and couldn't make it. So we've recorded and we'll be sharing that out more broadly. So I guess I have a few take homes for myself, and being in Ghana last week and seeing the power of some of this work, I just think the first step is just to make a start. And I think Anamaria expressed that really well, to start the conversations, to start small if that's all that's available, and then to see what is possible and where that grows for future investments. So for Regreening Africa, obviously in Ghana, that work will be continuing from the World Vision sites to the CRS sites. and expanding out for the last year. In some of the other countries, there's really good efforts being undertaken in terms of access to land, in terms of decision-making within the community. And so let's just build on what we've already started, and let's document what impact that has, what changes we see, because that should go into whatever comes next, whether it's another Regreening Africa phase 2, or it's other projects that your organizations are doing. Let's just start making some steps, document what we're doing, and then think about that and make sure we're sharing that so that it goes into future work. I think also I wanted to encourage people to reach out if they're interested. You know, we have a wide group. There's people that are doing things in West Africa and East Africa. There's people like Gloria that are really a resource, and Anamaria for now, that are able to share details about how they did this work and other information. So please reach out if you feel a little bit overwhelmed by getting started. But I think in most of the countries, there is something happening, and let's just build from that. So that's my kind of take home. And thank you very much to everybody. I know we're past the time. So have a great rest of your day, evening, morning, wherever you are. And thank you so much for your time. And thank you, Constance.
Thank you so much, Mika. All right, so if people are willing to bring your video on for one last goodbye, I want to give a big thanks to our interpreters. Brilliant. I want to give a big thanks to Winnie. Marianne is going to be writing a blog about this. We're going to get the presentations translated into French. And so please, if you have video capability and bandwidth, please bring your video on so that we can wave goodbye and wish everyone good health and a lovely rest of your day. And I know some of you get back to having a holiday in some of the countries. So thank you again. And we wish you a beautiful rest of your day. Thank you for joining. And we will save all of this information. Take care. We're going to see you on November 2nd. Bye.